My neighbor built a private dock into the stormwater pond behind our homes, then told me water did not belong to anybody. That was his answer, after I found fresh cedar decking, a row of decorative boulders, and nearly 30 feet of new shoreline extending into the retention basin that was supposed to protect our whole block from flooding. He had turned a drainage pond into a backyard resort. The trouble was, it was never a lake. It was a stormwater facility. And when the first heavy rain of the season sent brown water crawling toward 3 garages, the county did not care how nice his dock looked. They cared that somebody had filled in part of a protected basin, narrowed the overflow area, and altered a drainage plan that had been recorded before a single house in our neighborhood was built. My neighbor thought he had made his property more valuable. By the end of the inspection, he was paying to remove every board, every boulder, every truckload of fill, and every inch of landscaping that had pushed the water where it no longer belonged. If you enjoy stories where a neighbor's improvement becomes a costly lesson in property records and county maps, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. Because when the county measured his new shoreline, they found more than a dock. They found the reason our garages had started flooding. My name is Anna Mercer, and I live in a neighborhood called Lake Haven Ridge. The name was one of those developer choices that sounded more peaceful than the place really was. There was no lake. Not exactly. Behind the homes along the south side of our street sat a large stormwater retention pond. It was roughly oval-shaped, shallow around the edges, deeper in the center, and surrounded by cattails, tall grass, and a narrow strip of maintained lawn. Most of the year, it looked like a small pond. After a dry summer, the water sat low enough that you could see muddy banks and little clusters of frogs near the reeds. After a hard storm, the level rose quickly and spread across the broad, shallow basin behind our homes. That was the point. The pond collected runoff from 38 houses, 2 side streets, and the slope behind the shopping center on the other side of the subdivision. It slowed the water down before it reached the drainage channel near the county road. Nobody owned the water, but somebody absolutely owned the responsibility for where it went. The pond itself was part of a dedicated drainage tract managed by the HOA. The narrow lawn strips behind certain homes, including mine, belonged to individual homeowners, but were subject to drainage easements. It was not the prettiest setup. It was also not the kind of thing most people thought about until it failed. I had been in Lake Haven Ridge for 7 years. My back fence sat about 20 feet from the pond's normal edge. I did not fish in it. I did not let Jasper swim in it. I did not pretend it was scenic waterfront property. I respected it for what it was. A big engineered bowl designed to keep water out of our homes. My neighbor, Everett Sloan, saw it differently. Everett bought the house directly behind and to the left of mine about 2 years after I moved in. He was a commercial real estate broker, always dressed well, even when he was taking out trash, and talked about his house, like it was a future investment instead of a place where people lived. When he first moved in, he was friendly enough. He brought over a bottle of wine, shook my hand, and said, "Great location back here. That pond view is going to sell one day." I remember looking past him toward the muddy retention basin. "Maybe," I said. He smiled. "You have to know how to market a thing." The first summer, Everett did normal backyard work. He added a stone patio. He replaced his fence. He planted ornamental grasses near the rear edge of his lawn. Nothing bothered me. Then he hired a landscaping crew the following spring. They arrived with a small excavator, a trailer full of stone, and 3 dump trucks that came and went for 2 days. At first, I assumed Everett was redoing his patio, but when I walked Jasper along the pond path that Saturday, I saw the work was happening at the water's edge. The crew had cleared part of the cattails. They had scraped away the natural slope, and they had placed large gray boulders in a curved line where the pond began. Behind the boulders, they had laid fresh sod. It looked nice. Too nice. The curved edge made Everett's yard appear larger, as though the pond had politely moved back to give him more lawn. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out whether I was seeing an actual problem or just a neighbor spending too much money on landscaping. Then I saw the dirt. The new sod sat higher than the existing ground. Not by much. Maybe 6 or 8 inches in places. But the soil behind the boulders had been built up. I walked home and pulled up the HOA rules. There was a whole section on drainage easements. No homeowner could grade, fill, landscape, fence, build, or alter any part of a drainage facility or easement without written approval from the HOA and county stormwater office. That seemed straightforward. I emailed Everett. I did not accuse him of anything. I wrote, "Hey, I noticed the work near the pond. Did the HOA approve the new shoreline landscaping? I only ask because the drainage easement rules are pretty strict back there." He replied 30 minutes later, "Yes, it's handled." That was all. I considered leaving it there. Then, 2 weeks later, he built the dock. It was not a big boat dock. You could not have launched anything larger than a child's kayak from it. But that somehow made it more ridiculous. A cedar platform extended from Everett's backyard, out past the new boulder line, and over the shallow edge of the pond. It was about 14 feet long and 8 feet wide. With 2 benches built into the sides, he added string lights along the posts. Then he placed 2 Adirondack chairs on it. By the following weekend, he had a small metal fire pit near the dock entrance and a cooler beside the patio. His friends stood out there drinking wine while the pond reflected the lights. From a distance, it looked pleasant. Up close, it looked like someone had built a deck into a storm drain. Carl came by one evening and stared over my fence. "Is he planning to keep a yacht back there?" he asked. "I think it's a dock." Carl looked at the shallow brown water. "For what? Optimism?" He laughed. But the dock did not make me laugh. The posts had been driven into the pond bank. The newly raised lawn pushed closer to the water, and the boulders had pinched off part of the shallow shelf where stormwater normally spread during heavy rain. I contacted the HOA. This time, I included photographs. The manager, Denise Harper, replied that the board was aware of landscape improvements at Everett's property and that no structural changes have been approved within the common drainage tract. That answer raised more questions than it answered. The dock was absolutely structural. I asked whether the board had issued written approval for it. Denise said she would check. 2 days later, Everett knocked on my back gate. He did not wait for me to invite him in. He stood on the other side of the fence, looking toward the pond. "You reported my dock?" he said. I asked the HOA whether it was approved. "Same thing. If it was approved, then there is no issue." He gave a short laugh. "You really think that little platform hurts anybody? I think this is a retention pond. It's water. It is a stormwater basin." He folded his arms. "Water doesn't belong to anybody." I looked at the dock, then at the fresh sod that had pushed his yard farther toward the center of the basin. "The water may not," I said, "but the drainage plan does." His smile disappeared. "You people around here act like every improvement needs a committee meeting. Anything built in a drainage easement does." He shook his head. "You need to relax." "Anna?" I did not answer. I had learned that people like Everett did not hear warnings as information. They heard them as insults. A week later, the first big rain came. It started on a Thursday afternoon and lasted into the night. Not a hurricane. Not a once-in-a-century event. Just a strong spring storm that dropped a little over 4 inches of rain across the county. At 7 that evening, I looked out my back window and saw the pond rising. That was normal. Beoshem, 30. The water had covered the low muddy edge and reached the base of Everett's new boulder line. Still normal. But by 9:15, the water was behaving differently. Instead of spreading evenly across the broad, shallow side near Everett's yard, it was backing up against the filled area and pushing sideways. A dark sheet of runoff moved toward the rear garage lanes behind 3 houses on our side of the street. I put on rain boots and walked outside with a flashlight. The water had reached the bottom of my neighbor Sheila's detached garage door. Across the pond, Everett's dock was half underwater. The string lights still glowed beneath the rain. Sheila was standing in her yard with a towel wrapped around her shoulders. "My garage is taking water," she called. I crossed through the side gate and saw muddy runoff pooling along the concrete apron. Her husband was dragging storage bins away from the door. 2 houses down. Another neighbor had water creeping toward his workshop. I called the HOA emergency number. The voicemail picked up. I left a message. Then I called the county stormwater hotline. This time, someone answered. I explained that a retention pond was overflowing toward residential garages and that recent unapproved landscaping and a dock had altered the basin edge. The woman on the line asked whether there was immediate danger to life. "No," I said, "but garages are taking water." She gave me an incident number and said an inspector would assess the site after conditions were safe. At 0. The rain slowed. The pond level stopped rising. No homes flooded. But Sheila's garage took almost 2 inches of muddy water, enough to damage boxes, rugs, and a small freezer stored against the wall. The workshop 2 houses down had water under the threshold. By morning, the pond had begun to recede, and the damage became easier to see. Everett's new shoreline had turned into a muddy shelf. The boulders sat partly buried. Fresh sod peeled back in strips. The dock leaned slightly to one side. But the most telling thing was the water line. A dark mark around the basin showed exactly where the pond had tried to spread before Everett's fill, and stone forced it sideways. I took photographs from every angle. Then I pulled up the subdivision drainage plan. It had been filed with the county before Lake Haven Ridge was built. The plan showed the retention basin's required storage area, the emergency overflow route, the maximum permitted grading line, and the no-fill zone surrounding the pond. Everett's new lawn, boulder edge, and dock all sat inside that no-fill zone. I measured the distance using the scale on the plan. Then I compared it to a satellite image from the previous year. His shoreline had moved outward by nearly 11 feet at its widest point. 11 feet of stormwater basin had been replaced with dirt, sod, stone, and a private dock. That was not landscaping. That was taking capacity away from a system built to protect everyone else. At 10:30 that morning, Everett came outside. He saw me near the pond with my folder and phone. "What are you doing now?" he called. "Documenting the water line." "For what?" "The county." He walked toward the dock, stepping carefully around the mud. This storm would have flooded anyway. Maybe, but the plan shows this side is part of the overflow shelf. He looked down at the paper in my hand. "You're blaming my landscaping for rain?" "I'm asking the county to measure what was changed." He laughed without humor. "Good luck proving that." I looked at the dock, the fresh fill, the peeled back sod, and the water still draining toward Sheila's garage. Then I said, "I don't have to prove it by myself." Because the county had the original drainage plan, and all they had to do was compare it to the shoreline Everett had built, the county inspector arrived the following Tuesday. Her name was Lauren Veja. She drove a white county truck with stormwater operations printed on the door, wore knee-high boots, and carried a bright orange survey rod over one shoulder. She did not arrive alone. Behind her came another truck, pulling a small trailer with measuring equipment, and a man named Robert Gaines from the county engineering office. Everett was in his yard before they had even parked. He stood near the dock with his hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed. The dock had not improved since the storm. One corner leaned lower than the rest. Mud covered the lowest boards. The string lights hung loose along a post where the water had pulled the wiring down. Lauren introduced herself. "Mr. Sloan. We received a complaint regarding possible fill and structures within the Lake Haven Ridge stormwater basin." Everett smiled. "I have some landscaping back here. That's all." Robert looked toward the boulders. "Did you install those?" "Yes." "Did you place fill behind them?" "I had the yard graded." "Did you obtain county approval?" Everett's smile faded a little. "My contractor handled permits." "Can you provide the permit number?" "I'll have to check." Lauren looked at the dock. "And the platform?" "It's a small dock." "This is a retention facility," she said. It is not approved for private recreational structures. Everett shrugged. Water doesn't belong to anybody. Lauren looked at him for a moment. Then she said, the water may be public runoff, but the basin is an engineered, county-regulated facility. That distinction matters. I stood beside my fence and said nothing. I had brought my folder, but I did not hand it over immediately. I wanted them to see the site first. Robert walked along the edge of the pond with the survey rod. Lauren followed, taking photographs and making notes. They measured the new boulder line, the edge of the sod, the dock posts, and the visible high water mark left by the storm. Then they walked to Sheila's garage. Sheila showed them the muddy line on the wall, the wet storage boxes, and the floor fan still running inside. Robert asked where the water had come from. She pointed toward the pond. It came right across the back lane. She said, we've had hard rain before. I've never had water under that door. Lauren wrote that down. When they returned to the pond, I handed them the original drainage plan. I pulled this from the county record system. I said, the no-fill shelf is shown along this whole section. Robert unfolded the plan on the hood of his truck. He studied it for a long time. Then he looked up at Everett's yard. Miss Mercer, he said, do you have the satellite comparison you mentioned in your complaint? I showed him. The older image had the original pond edge, tall grass, a natural slope, and water spreading across a broad, shallow shelf. The newer image showed fresh lawn, decorative stone, and the dock. Robert tapped the map. This area was designed to detain runoff during high water events. Everett stepped closer. Designed by who? The subdivision civil engineer. And that was when? 21 years ago. Everett spread his hands. So you're telling me I can't improve my own backyard because of a plan from 21 years ago? Lauren looked directly at him. I'm telling you that a recorded stormwater easement and drainage facility plan remain in effect until they are legally modified. You cannot fill or build in the basin because you prefer the view. He looked at me. You started all this? I met his eyes. No. The water did. The inspection lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time Lauren and Robert left, they had placed orange flags along the original basin line and marked the fill area with paint. Robert would not give an exact number on the spot, but he said the altered section appeared to reduce the basin's available storage volume and interfere with its designed overflow direction. That was enough. The county posted a notice on Everett's fence the next morning. Stop work order. No additional landscaping. No repairs to the dock. No grading. No new fill. No alteration to the basin until the county completed its review. It was the first time Everett could not explain the problem away with a shrug. The notice was bright red. Every person walking the pond path could see it. And because Lake Haven Ridge had a neighborhood Facebook group that treated every visible notice like a public emergency, people started asking questions before lunch. Someone posted a picture. Does anybody know why the county shut down Everett's Pond project? The comments came fast. A few people complained that the dock had always looked nice. Others said they had wondered why the water rose so close to their garages. Sheila posted a photograph of the muddy line inside her garage. That changed the tone. Then a man named Dale, who lived near the entrance, wrote, "The HOA should have stopped this before it happened." That was a fair point. The HOA had known about the landscaping. Denise had admitted as much in her earlier email. The board had simply treated the work as a private homeowner project, instead of checking whether the work crossed into the drainage tract. Once the county became involved, the HOA suddenly found its voice. Melissa Carter sent a neighborhood-wide email 2 days later. It said the board was cooperating fully with county stormwater staff and had never approved any structural work inside the drainage facility. That was true, but it skipped the part where they had received multiple questions about the dock, the altered shoreline, and the landscaping near the pond, and did nothing. I did not respond to Melissa's email. I did not need to. The county record would tell the story better than I could. A week later, Lauren called. Miss Mercer. We completed the preliminary field comparison. She said, "What did you find?" The fill and landscaping appear to have displaced approximately 180 cubic feet of storage volume. I tried to picture that number. That's a lot? For this type of basin and this location? Yes. The bigger concern is not only the volume. The altered grade redirected overflow toward the rear garage lane. So it did contribute to the flooding? We cannot say it was the only factor in a storm event. But it likely changed the way water moved through the basin. That was as much as she could responsibly say before the full engineering review. And it was enough. The county ordered Everett to hire a licensed civil engineer at his own expense. The engineer would have to survey the site, calculate the amount of fill, compare the current basin contours with the approved drainage plan, and submit a restoration proposal. Everett had 30 days. He did not take it well. He came to my house that evening just before sunset. I was watering a planter on my porch when he walked up the driveway. He did not say hello. "You got what you wanted," he said. I set the hose down. "What I wanted was for you not to build a dock in a retention pond. You cost me an engineering report. You changed a drainage basin. You made it into a county issue." "No. The county did that after they measured your shoreline." He stepped closer. "You have no idea how much this is going to cost." I believed him. The engineering inspection alone would cost several $1,000s. Removing the dock would cost more. Taking out the boulders, excavating fill, rebuilding the basin slope, restoring vegetation, and repairing the garage lane drainage could become a serious project. But I did not feel sorry for him. Not because I wanted him ruined, because he had been offered every chance to stop before the damage reached this point. I said, "You could have checked the plan before you hired the contractor." He gave a bitter laugh. "You people act like I built a dam." I looked toward the pond. "You narrowed an overflow shelf? That is close enough." He shook his head and walked away. The civil engineer Everett hired came out the following week. His name was Paul Hatcher. And unlike Everett, he did not pretend the dock was decorative landscaping. He spent nearly a full day at the pond with a survey crew. They set up a tripod near the rear fence line. They took elevation readings around the basin. They measured the top of the boulder line, the new sod, the dock footings, and the original grade where it still existed. I watched from my yard while Jasper sniffed around the fence. At one point, Paul walked over to talk to me. "You filed the original complaint?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you have copies of the drainage plan?" I handed him the folder. He read the basin note and nodded. "This is going to be hard to restore cleanly." "Why?" "Because the contractor did not simply put in a dock. They built up the bank behind that stone. Once fill gets packed into a basin shelf, you have to remove it carefully and rebuild the grade in layers. Otherwise, you create a weak spot or new drainage problem." "Can the dock stay?" He looked at it. "No. Not if the county enforces the plan as written." I asked whether Everett had told him the work was approved. Paul gave me a tired smile. "Homeowners tell engineers a lot of things. We measure first." That became my favorite sentence of the whole situation. We measure first, not guess, not assume, not call a stormwater pond a lake because it makes a property listing sound nicer. Measure first. The engineer's report was filed 2 weeks later. I obtained a copy through the county file because it had become part of the enforcement record. The report confirmed what Lauren had suspected. Everett's contractor had placed approximately 44 cubic yards of fill inside the protected basin area. The boulder line and raised lawn had shifted the normal pond edge outward by between 7 and 11 feet, depending on the location. The dock posts and footing pads had disturbed the shallow shelf. Most important, the modified grade forced stormwater away from its designed spread area and toward the rear access lane behind Sheila's garage. The report recommended complete removal of the dock, boulders, fill, and unauthorized sod. It also required regrading to the recorded basin contours, restoration planting with approved wetland edge vegetation, and a post-restoration inspection after the next significant rain. The estimated restoration cost was $18. Lube. That did not include the engineering report itself, or the cost of repairing damaged property in Sheila's garage. or the county penalty if Everett failed to comply. The county gave him 14 days to submit a removal schedule. That was when Everett tried to blame his contractor. He told the HOA that he had hired a reputable landscaping company and assumed they had handled all approvals. The contractor's response was less helpful. They produced the work order. It listed pond edge landscaping and private dock platform as separate items. At the bottom, next to the box marked Permit Responsibility, Everett had initialed a line stating, "Owner to confirm HO and county requirements." He had signed it. The contractor had made mistakes too. They should have asked more questions before working near a regulated basin. But Everett could not honestly claim he had been misled. He had chosen the work. He had signed off on it. And when I asked him about the drainage plan, he had told me water did not belong to anybody. Now, the county had measured exactly what his private shoreline had taken from everyone else. The removal date was set for the first Monday in August. And Everett still had one last chance to make a decision. He could restore the pond voluntarily, or he could let the county bring in its own contractor, bill him for the work, and add penalties on top of it. Everett waited until the last possible day. That did not surprise me. People who make a mess with confidence often believe time will somehow turn it into someone else's problem. Maybe the county would get busy. Maybe the HOA would step in. Maybe another storm would not come. Maybe enough neighbors would complain about the dock being removed that someone would decide it was easier to leave it alone. But the county did not forget. At 7:15 on the Monday morning after Everett's deadline, 2 flatbed trucks, a small excavator, and a restoration crew arrived behind his house. Everett had finally signed the voluntary restoration agreement the Friday before. He had not done it because he suddenly agreed with me. He did it because the county gave him the numbers. If he hired his own approved contractor and completed the restoration plan under inspection, the estimated cost would be around $18. Lube, plus engineering fees and the repair claim from Sheila's garage. If he refused, the county could contract the work itself, place a lien against his property for the cost, and assess additional enforcement penalties. The choice was not really a choice. It was simply the least expensive version of consequences. The crew started with the dock. They removed the chairs first, then the string lights, then the cedar benches. The dock had looked so permanent when Everett built it. It had been clean, level, and carefully lit. It had made the retention pond look like a little private waterfront escape. But once the crew began taking it apart, it was only lumber, screws, and posts driven into mud. The excavator lifted the deck sections one by one. Workers removed the posts. They loaded every piece onto a trailer. By noon, the dock was gone. Everett watched from his patio for most of the morning. He did not speak to me. I did not speak to him either. There was nothing left to say. The boulders came next. That took longer. They had been set deep into the filled bank, and each one had to be lifted carefully so the crew would not damage the existing basin edge. Behind the boulders, they found exactly what the engineer had predicted: compacted fill, stacked in layers, mixed with gravel and pieces of broken landscaping fabric. It was not a natural shoreline. It was a raised wall of dirt disguised as a backyard improvement. Truckload after truckload carried the fill away. The crew removed 44 cubic yards in total. That number sounded abstract until I watched it leave. It took more than 4 full dump truck loads. 4 loads of soil Everett had pushed into a basin built to hold water. By the second afternoon, the raised lawn was gone. The pond edge looked rough and exposed, but it was beginning to resemble the original drainage plan again. The workers used laser levels to rebuild the shallow slope. They removed the decorative sod, reshaped the soil, and restored the gradual shelf where water was supposed to spread during storms. Then they planted native wetland edge grasses and low-growing plants selected by the county engineer. Nothing about it looked luxurious. No string lights, no cedar benches, no fake shoreline, just grass, soil, drainage, and room for water to go where it needed to go. That was enough. Sheila came out one afternoon while the crew was working. She stood beside me at the fence. "They offered to replace the things in my garage," she said. "That's good. They paid for the freezer, the storage bins, and the cleanup company. Did they? She nodded. Everett's attorney sent a release. I had it reviewed before I signed anything. I smiled. That was smart. She looked at the pond. You know, I thought you were being a little hard on him at first. I know. I liked the dock. A lot of people did. But when that water came under my garage door, I understood. It wasn't just his backyard anymore. No, I said. It never was. That was the part people had missed. Everett had looked at the pond and seen scenery. I saw infrastructure. He saw water he could decorate around. I saw runoff from 38 homes. A shopping center slope. 2 streets. And every storm that rolled through Lake Haven Ridge. Neither of us was wrong about what it looked like. But only one of us understood what it was for. The county completed the final grading inspection 3 weeks later. Lauren Vega returned with Robert Gaines and the engineer, Paul Hatcher. They checked the elevations, inspected the restored shelf, and compared the new contour readings to the original subdivision plan. The basin had been restored within the required tolerance. The dock was gone. The boulders were gone. The fill was gone. The emergency overflow path was clear again. Everett had also paid the engineering cost, the restoration cost, Sheila's property damage settlement, and a county administrative penalty for altering a protected stormwater facility without authorization. The total came to just over $27. Ling ling ling. That was more than he had paid to build the dock in the first place. And it did not include the value of the weekends he spent watching it get dismantled. A month later, the next hard storm arrived. This one was not as severe as the first, but it was enough to test the work. Rain came down for 4 straight hours. I stood at my back window with a flashlight. Watching the pond rise, the water spread across the restored shelf exactly where it was supposed to. It moved outward. It slowed down. It filled the shallow basin, instead of forcing itself toward the garage lane. Sheila's garage stayed dry. The workshop stayed dry. By morning, the pond had begun to recede, leaving a wet line across the grass and nothing more. No muddy water under doors. No ruined boxes. No emergency calls. Just a drainage basin doing the quiet job it had been designed to do. The HOA held a meeting the following week. Melissa Carter stood at the front of the clubhouse and announced a new policy for homes bordering the pond. Any landscaping, grading, fencing, deck, dock, retaining feature, or shoreline work within 50 feet of the basin would now require county confirmation before the HOA even reviewed it. Nobody argued. Not after watching Everett's dock disappear. Dale from the entrance stood up and asked why that had not been the policy from the beginning. Melissa gave a long answer about updating procedures, working with county standards, and learning from recent events. What she meant was simple. They should have checked before the first truck arrived. After the meeting, Everett approached me in the parking lot. I had not spoken to him much since the restoration began. He looked tired. Not angry anymore. Just tired. I talked to the county engineer. He said, I waited. He said the pond might have overflowed differently even without my work, but he said my fill made it worse. Yes. I didn't think it was a big deal. I know. He looked toward the clubhouse doors. I thought I was improving the property. You were improving the part you could see. He nodded slowly. That's fair. For a moment, I expected him to argue or ask me to admit I had gone too far. He did neither. Then he said, I should have listened when you told me to check the plan. Yes. I said, that was all. No dramatic reconciliation. No sudden friendship. But it was the first time Everett spoke as though the pond was something bigger than his backyard. After that, he kept his landscaping well back from the water. He planted 2 small trees near his patio instead. He replaced the fire pit with a simple stone bench. And one afternoon, I saw him standing near the restored pond edge with a pair of binoculars, watching a blue heron pick through the reeds. Maybe he finally saw the place differently, or maybe he simply understood what it would cost if he did not. Either way, The pond stayed open. It stayed plain. It stayed useful. And that was more beautiful to me than a dock ever could have been. I did not report Everett because I wanted to ruin his yard. I reported him because his private improvement had begun putting everyone else's property at risk. He told me water did not belong to anybody. Maybe that was true in the narrowest sense. But when water is collected, measured, routed, and held back by an engineered basin, somebody is responsible for leaving room for it. Everett took that room. The county measured what he took, and when the rain came again, the restored shoreline proved exactly why it mattered. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe for more HOA and neighbor justice stories, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, if your neighbor built a dock or filled part of a retention pond behind your home, would you speak to them first or report it as soon as you saw the work begin? Some people might say Everett was only trying to make his yard beautiful. Others may say he crossed the line the moment he changed a drainage basin that protected every home around it. Where would you draw that line? Leave your take below. I read more of these than you might think.